Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. In the last episode, I talked briefly about the new book by David Benatar, Living with Adversity. There's a free sample available on Google Books and there are some notable points in it. Table of contents show that there are at least 18 chapters for each type of adversity. Personal human adversities like living with addictions, different types of physical diseases and disorders, mental traumas and disorders, and socially induced adversities, and so on. One of the 18 contributors is David Benatar's own father, Solomon Benatar, who has been living with type 1 diabetes for more than 70 years. David Benatar even mentions him in the dedication of the book, dedicated to all my contributors, one of whom is my father, whose life with diabetes led me to conceive of this book. As coming from arguably the most recognized anti-ratalist philosopher today, on the one hand, it is not surprising that the adversities one sees around can contribute to one's worldview, but at the same time, it could be surprising to some anti-natalists who hate their parents. Although a similar observation could be made about the dedication of Better Never to Have Been as well. In fact, his father's adversity is what motivated this collection. The impetus for the collection is an adversity that I witnessed rather than personally experienced, namely my father's living with type 1 diabetes and all that involves. But as we have seen that this is just one of the 18 adversities. David Benatar explains how he sought them and compiled them so the readers can understand what the other people are going through. The aim of the book is to provide an insight into the adversities of others and to expose what is often hidden. Now, those 18 adversities are by no means representative of the entire humanity and by no means exhaustive either. Benatar is open about this. There are no adversities covered about ableism, divorce, war, uncertainty of living with medical conditions, and so on. He also does not seem to cover adversities related to social structure one is born into. Nor are animals covered here, but these exclusions are not to make a point, but just to keep the book reasonably readable. The book focuses only on human adversities. This is not because the adversities of animals are unimportant, quite the opposite. Animals, both wild and those reared to provide food for humans, suffer unspeakably. Moreover, many humans are in even greater denial about animal suffering than they are about the suffering of their fellow humans. While this is noteworthy, this book is not the place to showcase animal suffering. This is because the book is a collection of first-person accounts of living with adversity, which animals are unable to provide. Okay, so what has this to do with antinatalism, other than the fact that it is compiled by David Benatar? The adversities highlight some of the suffering that people have to go through. So not directly about antinatalism, but more towards pessimism, which can guide us on the path of antinatalism. But despite seeing and even experiencing those adversities, not all 18 authors agree with Benatar's antinatalist conclusions. I happen to know that some of the contributing authors in this volume share my views about coming into existence, even when they do not make this clear in their contribution to this book. They include Ahmed Shanzu Ozge Osman and the anonymous author of the chapter on living with complex trauma. Most of the others are silent on this topic or have distinctly optimistic view. For them, adversity, whether their own or somebody else's, is bad, but it is not bad enough to generate the conclusion that it would have been better if none of us had come into existence. There was an article, The Repugnance of Human Extinction, Why Our Survival Matters, by Partha Dasgupta. Partha is an Indian-British economist from the University of Cambridge in the UK. In this article, he talks about why human extinction is bad. He points to climate change as the potential reason to cause our extinction. And the reason human-induced climate change is bad is because it has the potential to make our species extinct. And extinction of our species would be bad. And the reason our extinction would be bad is because it will stop the intergenerational transmission of the values that we hold and have inherited from our ancestors. Referring to Jonathan Shell's 1981 book, The Fate of Earth, Partha points out that the possibility that the future generations would inherit the projects that we build today adds value to our effort and our life. Future people add value to the creator's lives by making their creation durable. An artist may regard his work to be far more important than parenting, but he is helped by the presumption that there will be future generations to bestow durability upon them. Shell's focus was on public goods like art and sciences, whose transmission across multiple generations was far too important to allow extinction to happen. But Partha takes a step forward. Beyond these public goods, there are values held in private which also matter, and they also need to be transmitted to future generations. That's because we, the common people, don't have the talent to affect those public goods like art and sciences. So we can't have that as a justification to have children. But without us having them, I mean the children, the public goods on a collective level would not be realized. Partha says that even private values matter. We should have children with the intention of transmitting those values to future generations. Public goods aren't the only objects of ethical significance. Our values and practices are significant too. Many are private, even confined to the family, and it is important to us that they are passed down to our children and by then to their children into an indefinite future. Procreation is a means of making our values and practices durable. Another aspect is immortality. Many people have children because through their children, the parents can live beyond their own death. Our children provide us with a means of self transcendence, the widest avenue open to us of living through time, not merely in time. Both these factors work together. For example, the notion that our projects could further be continued by our children, even after we die, adds to the justification to work on those projects right now. The ability to leave descendants enables us to invest in projects that will not cease to have value once we are gone, projects that justify life rather than merely serve it. But there are some problems that I found in Partha's arguments. No future generation is interested in working on your projects before they are brought here. We cannot even ask them if they would be interested in working on our projects, and so we are imposing our interests upon them. And while doing this, we are also imposing risks of life on them. The notion of immortality through our children is just that, a notion. By having children for our notional ideas and desires, we would be causing real harm to real people. The idea that we give importance to intergenerational transfer of values over the individuals who are literally ground through the meat grinder that we are born into is quite insensitive. Individual humans, in Partha's arguments, are a mere means, just vessels to hold and transmit values who can then be discarded after their use, with little respect for the suffering that they go through in the process. This is rude and ethically questionable. Partha criticizes Kant for thinking that earlier generations pay the cost for well-being of the later generations. Kant's anxiety that earlier generations should carry their burdens only for the sake of the later ones, this, Path says, is a deep misconception. That's because this is not a game of who benefits whom, but we are all trustees of this intergenerational baton, and we ought to make sure to take care of it and pass it on. Every generation is a trustee of a wide range of assets, be they cultural or moral, produced or natural. It has inherited from the past. Looking backward, it acknowledges an implicit understanding with the previous generation of receiving the capital in return for its transmission. Well, if Parth can criticize Kant, then why does he not consider the fact that children are used as a means in this game? He doesn't, at least in this article. All in all, Parth tries to construct a justification for having children but fails to provide one. Now, what I've mentioned so far are standard antinatalist responses, and you would know them anyway. But there is one thing that Partha does not consider. He thinks that transmitting values to future generations is important and individuals are just carriers or trustees of those values. But what about the values which tell us not to use other sentient beings, or at least humans, as a means? What about the values which tell us not to cause harm to others? In other words, if values depend on not passing them further, then what do we do? In that case, extinction may not sound so repugnant, and it would depend on the means through which we go extinct. Partha does not address this because he talks only in the context of climate change and habitat preservation and so on. Speaking of future generations as a means to continue our projects, Matti Häyry wrote a new paper, Out There, No One Has a Right to Die. Here, we are not talking about this intergenerational game being played out on Earth, but in space, during the mighty space travels to other planets or even solar systems and beyond. Matti discusses the risks of traveling deep in space and very far distances where intergenerational journey would be required. So, what happens when people traveling to vast distances in outer space have children? Well, one thing is their well-being. Like, raising children in zero gravity or radiation risk, and so on. Those are serious technological problems and require serious ethical considerations. But more important is the question whether it is ethical to impose such situation onto children. You might say this happens on earth in two ways. People emigrate to a different country and have children there, but those are so small distances comparatively that those children can decide to return back if they want to. That may not be possible in long distance space travels, which take time beyond lifetimes. Secondly, the consent argument is applicable to all of us on earth, but there are some important differences. It may be one thing to commit your offspring to a world we know and to an extent control, yet another to condemn them to eternal darkness of the outer space, to put the matter poetically. And there are practical problems. The resources on a spaceship might be comparatively limited, demanding the most efficient usage. That would require some restrictions on who is allowed and who is not allowed to reproduce. The principle of reproductive heteronomy would replace the liberal democratic ideals of procreative autonomy. And in case of declining birth rates and reluctance to have children, women could be ordered to have them. Moreover, there is hardly a chance these generations would have an option to end their lives if they wish to. In these circumstances, no one even has a right to die, although many have the duty to perish at the altar of the greater good. Hence, the title of my treatise, Out There, No One Has a Right to Die. So, the subsequent generations of space travelers will be thrust into a life in darkness under a totalitarian regime. They won't even have an option to get out of there. Maybe the end of all this might be good, but it is ethically problematic to justify what these generations will have to go through. That's why Matti concludes, I would say that space exploration in the sense of colonizing other worlds is an irrational and immoral endeavor. The sooner the ideas of traveling into the stars are abandoned, the better. No Dice is a short film produced and directed by Sagar Islam. Sagar himself is a Bangladeshi filmmaker and actor with strong foundations in theatre and performance. The film No Dice is about antinatalism, and even though it is not yet released for public viewings, it has been part of many film festivals. One such festival was Nepal African Film Festival. And No Dice by Sagar Islam has received an honorable mention in the Best Short Film category at the Nepal International Film Festival held in Kathmandu, Nepal. So, congratulations to Sagar. And I have also heard that No Dice is planned to be released for public viewing both in Bangladesh and abroad through online streaming platforms and selected special screenings. So, let's hope that we get more news on this soon. Hidden Echoes, the science of antinatalism in some of Khayyam's poems from a sociological and philosophical perspective, is a new research paper by Muhammad Abbaszadeh, Saeed Sadir, and Masume Ghasemi. Looking at the abstract, it says the aim of this research is to show signs of antinatalist thinking in the poems of Khayyam, one of the well-known Iranian poets and philosophers. I don't yet have access to full paper, but the abstract talks about some concrete findings. The findings show that in Khayyam's poem, man, who has no advantage for the world, has unwillingly and without choosing entered the game of life in which justice is absent, and in this structural life he is constantly in the state of suffering that he cannot fight effectively. And finally, we have two notable videos. One is the interview of Sarah Diarna on The Dissenter. Sarah is an antinatalist herself, and she is a PhD candidate in interpretation studies at the University of Catania, where she collaborates with the chair of theoretical philosophy. She has published essays, articles, and reviews in various scholarly journals and collective volumes. In 2023, she edited the Italian translation of David Benatar's The Misanthropic Argument for Antinatalism for Oxford University Press. In 2025, she published a book on antinatalism in Italian, which translates to It's the Birth We Didn't Want, History and Theory of Antinatalism. In this interview, we get to know about Sarah's views on antinatalism, metaphysics, the phenomenon of birth, abortion, harms of life, death, history of antinatalism, what is proto-antinatalism, and much more. The interview is just under 2 hours, but very interesting for anyone looking into antinatalism. Another notable video was an interview of Chris Korda on the channel called Flirting with Friendship. Chris is a founder of the Church of Euthanasia, and they talk about thank you for not breeding anti-humanism and antinatalism, among other things. And those were some of the updates about antinatalism this week. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.